Cool. So I mean, firstly, thank you to Rajani and Nabil for like organizing all of this and making sure it all happens. Can we give them a round of applause? And you know, like the last year has been pretty tough. But I think we should give ourselves a pretty big pat on the back. Like, basically, we're one of the first sort of ICOs in 2017. And now we're in security audits, and we're well on the track to actually delivering on our white paper promises. And we're actually one of the first ICOs to actually even do that. Not even Ethereum has delivered their promises. So, come on, guys, let's give ourselves a round of applause. Yeah, and thank you so much for everyone working so ridiculously hard this year to make that happen. So, but you know, with that sort of not out of the way, but like making progress, you know, it's time to start thinking about like our future direction. And you know me, like I'm always kind of dreamy and stuff like that, so just bear with me. I'll probably go that way a little while, but I'll try and bring it down to earth in terms of like future directions. But I thought before I start talking, I kind of want to show you like a bunch of YouTube videos for you guys. So yeah, we'll get into that now. All right. Stop. All right, I got some. So, does anyone know Jordi Bellino? Yeah. So for those who don't know, he actually wrote our SNT ICO smart contracts. And the reason he did is because he believes in what we're doing. He believes in basically a decentralized version of WeChat. And he thinks that what we're doing can basically do what WeChat did for China, but for Catalan. So if you're not familiar, Jordi Bellino is this amazing guru. He's like really into identity and zero knowledge proofs. But the reason he's doing it is because he's wanting independence of Catalan from Spain, right? And so he genuinely believes in this, and it's basically his life mission. If you ever mention this to him, just prepared for like 2 hours of just non-stop talking. He's very, very passionate about it. And he's very, very passionate about us as well. So I just wanted to play a quick 2-minute video of this sort of scenario. I did get permission to actually display these things, so good on Vox.
We are a territory with a strong national personality. We need our independence.
Hay mucha más gente que son españoles y queremos pertenecer a España.
Spain is in the middle of a political battle that threatens to split the country. The region of Catalonia held a referendum to decide if they wanted to become an independent state and therefore separate from Spain. The Spanish constitutional courts ruled the referendum illegal, and the central government tried to stop it from happening. They arrested government officials who were planning on holding the vote, confiscated ballots, and closed polling stations. Undeterred, the regional Catalan government announced that voters could print their ballots at home and vote at any open polling station. It didn't take long for the situation to escalate. Nearly 1,000 people were injured in the violence, 5 of them seriously. As for the results, 90% of participants voted to secede. This would seem like almost unanimous approval, but less than half of all eligible voters in Catalonia turned out to vote. Based on the results, the Catalan government is threatening to declare independence from Spain unilaterally. In response, the Spanish government is preparing an unprecedented takeover of Catalonia's regional powers, which will remove its leaders from office.
So I also talked about this at DevCon 4. And basically, it's kind of crazy. They tried to hold a referendum independently, and they even used IPFS, right? But the problem is Spain basically blocked all the IPFS proxies, and then so nobody actually used the technology, or not as many people got access to it, unless you knew how to access IPFS directly. So, you know, when we're working on status and like we have things like Infura, this is not good enough. Like, there is no half measures with this stuff. Like, if you have that, they're going to block it, and it's just not going to work, right? So like it's just kind of crazy. Like these people actually can benefit from having this infrastructure, and you can build institutions like voting on top of this stuff, and they can access it from their phones in a decentralized manner. You know, and when we have things like ultralight beam and you know mesh nets and that sort of thing, then even if they shut off the internet, these people can still coordinate with community money and community law and that kind of thing. Is anyone familiar with a guy called Amir Taki? Yeah? So for those who don't know, this guy is a hardcore crypto cypherpunk kind of guy. He calls himself like a warrior scholar, and he's huge on Bitcoin, but more importantly is he actually goes into Syria and works on actually fights on the front lines of against ISIS and that sort of thing. And the reason he's doing that is because he believes in a new independent nation that's being born called Rojava. So it's literally like 2 million people that are trying to establish a democracy in ISIS's caliphate. And it was basically the same story. Like I saw both of them in Barcelona just recently, and they want this infrastructure, right? They need decentralized infrastructure because they can't establish institutions without it being hostily taken over. And in this manner, it's actually with force and not just like blocking internet.
Tonight, on the front line in Syria.
How far away is the ISIS position? Just 500 meters.
The end of ISIS.
It's just motorcycles going past.
Peace is tantalizingly close. But when it comes, can it last? Something surprising is happening in Syria. From the chaos of war, an oasis of democracy has emerged, where women enjoy equal rights and all religions are tolerated. It's bringing stability to an area once dominated by ISIS. It's a fragile system led by the Syrian Kurds, but it's under siege from ISIS in the south, the Syrian Assad regime to the west, and Turkey to the north. And now they've lost their trump card. The Americans are withdrawing troops, a vital support that's let the burgeoning democracy take hold. But young people here are betting on a brighter future. Layla is now leading the reconstruction of Raqqa and putting her engineering skills to good use. One of the biggest jobs is rebuilding the main bridge.
الجسر القديم اتدمر أثناء تحرير المناطق. هو يعتبر بالإضافة إلى جانب الجسر الجديد عصب الواصل ما بين الضفة اليمنى واليسرى للفرات بهالمنطقة. مثل ما تلاحظون نهر الفرات من الرقة لمصر.
A woman taking this role was unthinkable during ISIS rule. Even shaking hands with male colleagues was forbidden.
So, I mean, like, clearly they have huge problems and we can't really solve them, but we can help build this infrastructure for them to solve it themselves. The thing is like, I don't know what it's like to believe in something so much that I'm willing to put my life on the line. And I don't know what they're doing is right or wrong. And I don't, like, the situations are very complex. But if they're willing to put their life on the line, there's 2 million of them trying to do this. Like, I feel like they should have a chance to be able to establish what they believe in. Is this like, I mean, I've got a few more of these, but I think you're getting the point, right? So This is recent, you know, the Hong Kong protest, all that sort of jazz. So yeah, just to remind you.
This protester calls himself Bruce. We've hidden his face, explored his voice to protect his identity. He's one of the millions of Hong Kongers taking to the streets.
Many people here are wearing face masks. People are hiding their identity. They fear that the government will press harder.
What started as a protest against an extradition has become the most serious challenge to the Communist Party's authority since the Tiananmen Square protest 3 decades ago. As the demonstrations enter a third month, neither the government nor the protesters is willing to back down.
Police fired tear gas and used that police people to hit them.
But it's not enough to deter the demonstrators. So what happens now?
This is a real nightmare for the communist government in Beijing. They can either crush Hong Kong or they can tolerate being defined in a way that undermines everything about their whole structure of government. They have no good choices.
Hong Kong is one of the most important financial centres in the world, and it has a unique status. It's a city in China, but it's not entirely Chinese. It has its own currency, its own passport, its own legal system. There's even a boundary between Hong Kong and the rest of China, and you need a permit to cross it. This is all down to its history. In 1842, Hong Kong was ceded by the Chinese to the British after the First Opium War. But in 1997, Britain gave it back to China.
Hong Kong people are to run Hong Kong.
With one important condition. For 50 years, Hong Kong was to be governed under what is known as one country, two systems. The chief executive, who runs Hong Kong, would be appointed by a pro-Chinese committee. But the city was guaranteed a high degree of autonomy, with its own government, legal system, and economic independence until 2047. Over the past decade, those rights have been eroded.
Yeah, so during the protests, like both the umbrella protests and this current one, I don't know if it has a name yet, they had to use closed source mesh Bluetooth MANET software, right? The first one was FireChat, and it was done by an author who was Chinese, living in China. And then I can't remember the name of this software, but it's also closed source. So like, how, that's what they're doing during protest time, but like, how are they supposed to, like, how are you supposed to work with that? How are you supposed to improve upon it? It's very difficult. And maybe the technology they're working on could probably help them coordinate. Who knows? That's this is Venezuela.
Siempre voy a estar en las calles luchando por la libertad de mis hijos. Bueno.
La violencia del gobierno y la violencia del AMPA. Todo eso son razones para tú salir a protestar, a manifestar, a defender tus derechos y aspirar a una mejor Venezuela.
Venezuela was once the richest country in Latin America. It has the largest known oil reserves in the world, and its democratic government was once praised worldwide. But today, Venezuela's democratic institutions and its economy are in shambles. The country has the highest inflation rate in the world, making food and medicine inaccessible to most Venezuelans. Over the last 4 years, its GDP has fallen 35%, which is a sharper drop than the one seen during the Great Depression in the US. And the country's murder rate has surpassed that of the most dangerous cities in the world. These conditions have sparked months of protests against the president, Nicolas Maduro, and it's easy to see why. The country has become measurably worse since his election in 2013. A poll showed that about 80% of Venezuelans want Maduro removed from office. But instead, the opposite has happened. Maduro has consolidated his power, bringing the country closer to authoritarian rule. Unlike Maduro, Chavez was a charismatic and beloved leader. In the 90s, he burst onto television sets across the country. He blamed government corruption and Venezuela's elite for the economic inequality. His populist message resonated with the country's poor, who eventually helped bring him to power. The key moment in his presidency came in 2004, when oil prices surged. Venezuela's petroleum-dependent economy started booming, and Chavez went on to spend billions from the profits on social welfare programs for the poor. He subsidized food, improved the educational system, built an enviable healthcare system, and reduced poverty by more than half. These programs certainly helped the poor, but they served a purpose for Chavez as well. In order to be re-elected, he needed to keep these millions of poor Venezuelans happy. So he rigged the economy to do just that. He didn't scale back Venezuela's dependence on oil, and his unrestrained spending led to a growing deficit, which meant all of these programs would be impossible to sustain if oil prices fell. After Chavez's death, when Maduro took office as his handpicked successor, that's exactly what happened. Oil prices plummeted in 2014, and Maduro failed to adjust. Hyperinflation has made medicines and food that were once subsidized unaffordable for Venezuelans poor, who now make up about 82% of the population. Like Chavez, Maduro has also rigged the economy to keep himself in power, but this time it's not benefiting the poor. He's exploited a complex currency system put in place by Chavez. Maduro set the official exchange rate at 10 bolivars per US dollar, but only his friends and allies have access to this rate. In reality, the Venezuelan currency has become basically worthless. Most Venezuelans get their dollars on the black market, where the rate is about 12,000 bolivar per dollar. The military, which got complete control of the food supply from Maduro in 2016, is reportedly profiting off this currency crisis. They import food at Maduro's special currency rate and sell it on the black market for a massive profit. So for military generals and political allies of Maduro, the crisis has offered a lucrative opportunity which has helped Maduro stay in power. The international community, including Peru, Canada, Spain, Mexico, and Argentina, condemned the election. The US imposed financial sanctions on Maduro and members of his government. But Maduro's assembly, filled with loyalists, convened anyway, and swiftly removed Attorney General Luis Ortega, leader of the opposition.
I'll talk about this, it's heavy stuff, right? But I'll talk a bit more about that on another slide. But the one comment I do want to make about this particular video is that economic sanctions are kind of brutal. They punish an entire population for a small handful of people's kind of job. And there's this idea called exit, voice, and loyalty, and the cost of exiting for the population is just too high. And we need to lower that cost as much as possible. So we'll go into a slightly lighter tone, but still pretty interesting, and I think this technology can apply to. And this is Rio de Janeiro's favelas. What's interesting about favelas in general, or basically these kind of grown communities and grown sort of urban areas, is if you go back 6 generations in America, most of those vibrant cities looked exactly the same. They were doing exactly the same thing. You create these little huts to start with, and then you eventually build up until you have skyscrapers. Coming from the developed world, we just assume that you have these developmental planners and you have massive loans and you can just build these things, right? And a lot of the solutions to this sort of stuff, to trying to solve this sort of stuff, particularly in Mumbai, is to bulldoze everyone's mud huts and then build a giant complex there, which they can't afford. So you constantly push the poor further and further out. Anyway, that's a whole other topic, but yeah, I just want to give you a little look at that.
And put it into 3D mode. You can see what the city looks like as it was designed by urban planners. But you'll notice parts of the city that don't look like the rest. See the difference? The people who live in these parts of the city with the clean lines and well thought out design are called people of the asphalt. The people who live in these parts of the city are called people of the hill. Even though the people of the asphalt and the people of the hill live closely intertwined throughout the city, they live vastly different lives. These informal communities that look like houses stacked on top of each other, sprouting out of the jungle, are called favelas, home to both vicious drug gangs as well as some of the most peaceful, creative, and resourceful people in Rio. A favela is a community that was built without any oversight of a public authority. no zoning, no building codes, no public services. In more recent times, favelas have been fueled by massive migrations from rural Brazilians coming into the city looking for work. Not able to find affordable housing, these workers built their own communities. Today, 25% of Rio's residents live in these favelas. This is Rocinha. It's Brazil's largest favela, and it has been dubbed a city within a city. It's a completely self-sufficient economy, the result of decades of makeshift solutions to basic needs like electricity and running water. Without a formal government presence, the residents of Rocinha created their own association, which helps coordinate public projects and resources. Since these associations grew up totally informally by people who had no training in public administration, the resulting community design brings with it a little more zest and creativity than your traditional city. But make no mistake, Rocinha is a full-on, functioning mini-city within the city of Rio de Janeiro. This impromptu resourcefulness is common within favelas. Why are these people who live in poverty and neglect so driven to create beauty in order to survive?
É porque você sempre espera pelo poder público. E o poder público nunca está pronto para você. Porque se a gente não fizer aqui, não é eles que vão vir aqui fazer. As coisas são mais permitidas. E outro é lugar muito esquecido.
This reality of neglect from public investment has created a culture of creative survival. But there's a dark side to this too.
That favelas are informal and unregulated. It means both that they can become incredibly vibrant because people can take this attitude and build on qualities and be creative and change your environment. But it also means that you can get incredibly dysfunctional places when the energy and the kind of approach is the opposite. So you have these two extremes and they come out of the same force of kind of informality and lack of regulation and kind of flexibility.
In 2008, the city of Rio was ready to take over the lawless territories of Rio. They assembled a special force of police officers to enter the favelas and drive out the gang influence. They called this process pacification of the favelas. But this gets tricky really fast. There's been this big discussion in the United States about police brutality, but Brazil is on a whole different level when it comes to police violence and corruption. Human Rights Watch estimates that US police kill 1 person for every 37,000 arrests. In Rio, they say that number is 1 in every 23 arrests. So you can see why some felt skeptical of letting the police come into the favelas to try to restore order. Pacification worked for Santa Marta and a few other favelas for the first few years after 2008. But this favela is small, and the city dedicated its best police forces to the job. It's been a whole different experience in places like Alemão and other bigger favelas. Many of the favelas that I visited that had apparently been pacified were very clearly still under the influence of the Red Command. So while there have been some successes in pacification, the city still has a huge challenge ahead of it in taking control of these places. Gang violence is certainly a problem. It represents one small slice of the favela experience. What seems to me as the more striking and interesting aspect of favelas are the thousands of men and women who are thriving in creative ways, in spite of being neglected by their government.
Cool. There's informal economy stuff that's like really interesting. I've got a bunch of books. Happy to share the titles if anyone's interested on that sort of stuff. So what's basically citizens in a state play this game, and it's commonly known as exit poison loyalty. It's originally created by a guy, well, thought of a guy called Albert. Does anyone know Albert Hirschman? I think it is. Don't quote me on that. But essentially, it's an ultimatum that citizens have. You basically have 3 choices at the end of the day. It also works with consumers and producers, right? One is if you don't like what's happening, you can exit. Usually that's kind of a last resort. More commonly, you want to issue your voice and try to change things and ask the government to do these sort of things. Or you're loyal and you're kind of passive and you're just like, yeah, whatever, it's not impacting me so much. much, which is the majority of people, right? So the progression is usually loyalty, voice, and then finally exit. But as you can see, the cost of voice alone can be incredibly high. Like this is when you start putting your own body, your own life on the line in the streets if it gets violent. And exit it's pretty impossible. Like, I mean, Venezuelans are flooding from Venezuela. You know, people are doing Brexit right now. So, like, it's true. Like, people do exit. And what's really interesting about like blockchains is this sort of forking idea, right? Like, you could literally, if an ideology or a certain group of people no longer want to participate in the overarching ideology, they can take everything and they can just fork it and they can just go do their own thing. Imagine if we got this technology and we put it on mobile devices. It seems a lot harder than I thought. But, but if we could do that, then it gives these people the option to exit and we reduce the cost of exiting. I don't know about how much, but it seems like a lot. So that's kind of like why this kind of matters, at least to me. And so like the question I asked myself and kind of why I'm in this room is like, what if we could provide the tools and infrastructure in a quote unquote complete package to basically help these people thrive, to help them to coordinate, to build their own institutions, their own ways of voting, their own money, right? Like not all of these people are going to want Ethereum. By the time they get access to it, Ethereum is going to be way more expensive than what it is today. They're probably going to want their own currencies, like many nations have their own currencies. And if we could give them this package, or if we can help tailor these solutions, then we can also participate in their success, right? We could. I don't know how that works exactly, but it seems a lot better than doing contract work for grants or contract work for corporations, and then these things just never materialize, right? So I think there's something to be said for kind of this idea. And like I was trying to think of an analogy to try and connect this to like some of the tech stuff. And the best I could really think of is like what Android did for smartphones, like we could actually do for communities. And then maybe one day they turn into nations, who knows? And quite frankly, we don't even have to be that good at it, right? The Copenhagen Consensus think tank, along with Cambridge University, came up with this really interesting paper. And they basically realized, well, they believe that roughly a 0.1% reduction in transaction costs will quadruple a country's wealth, right? That's literally the difference between Argentina and Switzerland. And that sounds nuts, right? I don't know if it's true or not, but like, we could probably lower transaction costs. I don't know, it seems like if we do that, and then we connect these communities, like, I don't know, through some kind of atomic swaps in chains and essentially connecting them to the global financial infrastructure, then you can imagine these favelas create their own currencies, their own coins. We connect them to like a master blockchain or whatever, and then all of this wealth and capital will flow. And more importantly, it doesn't get lost, right? So one of the issues with like putting these donations and dumping money into these things is because it just kind of like disappears. It's like a bucket with all these holes in it. But if you had this kind of infrastructure, the money would flow in and it would be within that currency. And perhaps it moves out into crypto to fiat kind of things like the Tor network. Or it flows back into the wherever it came from. There's a bunch of quotes from the what are they called? World Economic Forum. And I wanted to do a bunch of them, and like, this isn't even the best one, but like, I think it's kind of interesting for our positioning. They believe that digital ecosystems could account for more than $60 trillion in revenue by 2025, right? And most companies haven't really even caught on to this idea of doing this kind of ecosystem platform stuff. So like, we're kind of a little too early, but we're poised for it, right? And if we get this technology right, it's going to be huge. Well, I hope so anyway. This is kind of a crappy slide, but there's the same World Economic Forum people, they kind of came together and made this book, and like they're basically trying to find like these global targets for what actually is going to make the most impact. The ones that are relevant to us is basically reducing like world trade restrictions. This is kind of like the sanctions sort of stuff that I was talking about, or any kind of like red tape. And you get this with cryptocurrencies. Like as long as you have internet access and a way to transmit, you can transmit as much as you want without really any intermediaries kind of getting in your way. Money transfers they believe can reduce poverty quite theoretically. So that's kind of why we're also looking at the remittance market with the Teller network. And then there's some stuff to do with identity and like creating better institutions. It's a little unquantified, but we could probably help make institutions that are more corruption resistant by deploying these things on chain. Who's actually read like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? Anyone? Cool. Well, go read it. But there's a bunch of them. Like if you look at our what are they called? Principles. Yeah, the principles. Yeah. So if you look at our principles, actually a lot of them are very aligned with like a lot of human rights. So the United Nations is kind of on our side with this, right? They're like, yes, there should be free speech. Yes, there should be privacy. Yes, everyone should have the ability to participate in like governance of their people, right? And I actually made a bunch of slides listing all this stuff, but I won't go through it all because it's kind of, kind of tedious, not really the point. But, well, this is kind of us, right? It's a little unfair because like we kind of started during like an all-time high and like we've been in a bear market ever since. So just to keep that in mind, right? So the question is like, why should anyone believe us, right? Like I'm talking about going to these people and going, oh yes, we can provide you all this infrastructure, but why should they believe us? Why should they adopt this technology? Like we can't even capture value for ourselves at the moment. So we kind of need a proof of concept. So what would be amazing is if we could actually build a socioeconomic system, right? And what I mean by that is a social and economic system, a model of this economy. We want to be able to basically deliberately capture value and create proper steering for this economy. Because if we can do that, then we can say, hey, this is a template that we think that works. We know that, and it's not like we're going to build it all ourselves. We're going to go use like all this technology from other people. We could put it all together in a nice package, the way Android is, or like a way any like app is, and just go, hey, try this. And then maybe we can like help adapt it for their particular use cases. That's kind of like a bad slide and all that. So what I'm talking about here is like the active application of like Ethereum technologies. The thing is, what I'm talking about here is that it's kind of a little more political. It's kind of a little more tongue-in-cheek. Like it's actually getting real-world adoption. Currently, most of the community, crypto community, is in their own little bubble, and like we're only fighting around tech, right? But we're not actually talking about how we can get boots on the ground and make a real-world change. And like the Ethereum Foundation isn't wrong. Like I think the sort of hands-off approach is really great because they're trying to get more pervasiveness in this sort of stuff. But for us, it's kind of difficult, right? Like we built Status. We're trying to be a messenger to begin with, right? Well, I would say super app, but a messenger, right? And 2 out of the 3 things that they promised didn't get delivered, and we happened to build on those promises. So we're kind of stuck, right? Like the application's pretty good. It's getting better by the day. Like V1 is incredible. Like the amount of stuff that's being changed in terms of like offloading the JavaScript thread is phenomenal. But we need to start taking on more infrastructure. And I talked about this in a town hall, a couple of weeks ago. So I think the way that we go about designing the systems also needs to change. Like currently we're kind of like rushing to implementation or like maybe a specification. And it's okay, but the iteration loop is quite long and it's quite difficult. But what's kind of interesting is you can basically model this infrastructure, or at least the economics and the network and the mechanisms, and actually have multiple mechanism interactions. And you can start iterating on this model before you get to an implementation. I'm not saying that the implementation loop isn't important, because you learn a lot during that. But if we can do better planning and we have a better theoretical understanding of how these systems are going to interact with each other, to make this a little more concrete, like we want to do like network incentivization, we want to have like the teller network, we want to have like all of these different things interacting, but we don't know how they're going to interact. Like Barry's done some really amazing work on the sort of finance side and understanding how we're capturing value. And this is just kind of like the same idea, but like on steroids, right? And so there's this idea called complex adaptive systems, and there's like modeling frameworks around this to actually do this. And they're really fascinating because you can, am I going to, okay. You can basically model on differential equations, or you can go down to like the multi-agent scale. I'm probably losing a bunch of people right now. But the important thing is like, this could be really interesting for governance as well, or steering an economy. Because you could basically create this model, have an objective thing that's in Git repository, for example. Anyone can submit pull requests, and then like you try and capture everything you can about the model economy. And then the group of people can go off and actually implement it. And if they don't implement it, then it means the model is wrong, right? So it's this kind of like weird back and forth between like a free market and trying to understand how to steer it the best. Anyway, like I realize that's probably too woo-woo. Anyway, so like I already mentioned this, like, you know, light clients suck. Like we can't do what we want to do with the technology we're given. So we need to create better infrastructure. And so we're going to be working on, like, I think it's currently called adaptive nodes. And basically it's really early phases right now. So like I have my opinions, but it's probably going to totally change once like smarter people than me are going to be working on it. But basically we want to create an overlay network that is capable of doing efficient decentralized routing over intermittent networks, so like mobile phones. But like we also need to take in the resources of each individual node, right? So if you're a light client, like you're a mobile device and you're out in like a 3G connection, then your data is at a premium, your battery is at a premium, your resources are at a premium. So you're probably going to be a leecher. But that doesn't mean that when you come home and you plug it into the wall and you're on Wi-Fi, then maybe you can start participating in a network in a more stable and larger way. And of course, we're going to have like laptops and that sort of thing, and you're probably going to end up connecting more directly to your laptop or your friends' laptops, and defer trust that way as well. For me, like, status is a super app. Like, yeah, we have these like 3 core functionalities, and this is kind of how we're giving the messaging right now. It's like, you know, messenger, browser, wallet, that sort of thing. But if you look at like a lot of the applications today, like Grab, Gojek, Uber, they're all essentially becoming these super apps. They're trying to replicate what WeChat did. And if you look at how they're all operating, how they're actually all generating revenue, most of them comes from food delivery. Uber Eats has actually only cornered 1% of the market, right? What's interesting with this approach is that we start focusing on infrastructure, then we can start basically partitioning the way that we do this work, and we can create new entities, which are new companies on top of this infrastructure, and we can go raise money for them independently. So you could imagine that we could create like a food delivery DApp, which we can then raise money the same way you do Silicon Valley style. And then perhaps that is an alternative way for us doing user acquisition. Maybe, maybe not. Like, this is kind of the stuff that I like to discuss between all of us. So I didn't really talk about the application much the other day, but we are thinking about it, and there are some directions. Mache did a really interesting prototype. You can't see the QR code. Oh, it's because it's a video. So we actually, I'll watch this, but we actually got a prototype APK built by one of the ex-React Native core engineers at Facebook, just to see if we could actually get the performance out of it. And it kind of works, right? So, I mean, this is just the...
this is a demo of a window.
This is again.
First, do not freak out. It's not an app redesign, but rather a different way of binding the separate layers together. With that out of the way, let's get started. The first new thing you'll notice is this button on the bottom. Tapping it takes you to the window management UI. Here, as you can see, each window, be it a chat, a browser tab, or a wallet you own, is represented as a card in this 3D-like space. It's a familiar multitasking interface. You can scroll around it and tapping on any of the cards take you to it. It's really neat. Now, located in this UI are some other things. Clockwise from the top left is the profile. Nothing new there, just a way to access your user settings. Next up are category filters. Toggling them on and off will hide certain windows. Say you're not interested in chats at the moment, but are interacting with dApps and wallet. Just like that, you can hide chats. You only want a browser, easy, hide wallets. You can toggle them back on at any time. This makes managing and personalizing this view much easier. Next up is the search bar. Here you can filter out specific windows by keywords. On the bottom are notifications. This is something entirely new that both the chat and wallet would greatly benefit from. Here you can see a chronological list of all activity that's happening and react on incoming notifications. Last is a button to open new windows. This concludes the window UI, but there's something more. At any time, you can press and start dragging on the home button and get a quick shortcut menu to any of the freelance visited windows as well as notifications. With a single swipe, you can change your current context of anything you've been doing before. Together, I think these two make for an elegant and fun way to multitask inside status. And I guess it only depends on us if this design maps better to how we want the product to be used and developed. Thanks for watching.
That's pretty cool, right? There's the, that's the QR code if you want to get the APK of it, just get it from the slides. But I'm not saying this is what V2 will look like, but it's just a prototype, and we build out an APK and I don't know if this has got did this get, where's the bill? Yeah. Did it get fixed? Yeah. Okay. Okay, cool.
But if you have any error, just close it and then reopen it.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not perfect, right? So thanks for coming to Dreamland with me. Let's kind of bring it back down to earth. So what are the next steps? Well, so basically I'll be meeting with most of the development team separately tomorrow, I think it is, right? That's the deal. But just a quick high-level overview so everyone's kind of on the same page. Nimbus and Backbeat appeared, basically need to design, model, and implement the infrastructure. No big deal, right? The application needs to focus on the chat experience, and it needs to become sharding ready, right? Like Ethereum 2 is basically multiple shards, and basically that means multiple chains. So I don't know how we're going to do that. It kind of depends on Nimbus and Backbeat, no pressure. Okay, so Keycard is going to be looking to get investment and build out a payment network. We're not exactly sure, it's super early days for that. We might be working more closely with LeakDAO on that, I'm not sure. And Bark is going to be setting up these community initiatives and helping. One of those initiatives will hopefully be sharing economy dApp. I mean, it doesn't have to be, this is my suggestion. I mean, one of the oldest repos in status.im is one called Move and a generalized market framework, because that's why I started Status, because I wanted that. And we need to rebuild the marketing team, right? So those are kind of the high level sort of directions for everybody. Yeah, and I think that's pretty much everything. So So to kind of tie it all back, you know, it'd be great if we could create this open social and economic system, and basically create chains for other people and deploy them. I'm not saying we're doing this tomorrow. I'm saying this is just like the big picture. This is like the light at the end of the tunnel. Hopefully it's hopefully it's not too many years away, but it's not something we're doing immediately, but we are working towards it. Anyway, that's it from me. Thanks.
Okay, I'll let everybody just have like a 5-minute break, and then we're gonna switch, and then Carl's gonna